against particularly the Jews were now used, both of course against the Jews, but now also against the Christians. So the Christians got a taste of their own medicine, in other words. In spite of this, there was a huge development in the Islamic Empire, and people have asked how it came about that by the time of the Abbasids, Islam developed such a significant material and intellectual civilization. And the answer to that partly is, of course, because they wanted to do so. These people who had come from the desert wanted to partake of the fruits of the civilization that existed around them. But the other answer to this, of course, is that in doing this, they were assisted in this project by Christians and Jews, and also Zoroastrians to some extent. Many examples can be given of this in terms of polity, in terms of material civilization, architecture, and so forth. But the one that I want to focus on is the intellectual. It is a commonplace nowadays in the sorts of people that Melanie Phillips was talking about, in Britain certainly, to assert that Europe had received the riches of Hellenism from the Muslims. And of course, to some extent, in a partial sense, this is true. But the prior question is never asked, how did the Muslims get it? And the answer is, the Muslims got it mainly through Christian translators who were quite often clergy of the different churches at that time, who first translated either from directly from Greek into Arabic or from Syriac into Arabic. The corpus of medical knowledge, of philosophy, particularly of Aristotle and the Neoplatonists, of science in its different aspects, and so forth. Just to give you one example of a father-son team, Hunayn ibn Ishaq was a Nestorian Christian who was better at Greek, so he translated from Greek into Syriac. His son, who was confusingly called Ishaq ibn Hunayn, knew better Syriac and Arabic, so he translated from Syriac into Arabic. Between them, they translated the whole of the Greek medical corpus into Arabic, and eventually, when this arrived in Western Europe, it was still in use in medical schools, for example, in Oxford, right up to the 18th century. A lot of this knowledge was then taken via Spain through the translation schools established by Christians, but including Jews, and from there it arrived in Western Europe either through Jewish traders, and you can see this in terms of the Hebraic forms of Islamic names in European languages. So Ibn Rushd becomes Averroes, Ibn Sina becomes Avicenna, and so forth. So it arrived either through that route or through the Mozarabic community, the Arabic-speaking Christians of Europe, Arabic-speaking Christians of Europe who found themselves in Western European monasteries. That's how it got there. Now, this feast of reason and flow of soul was rudely interrupted by two events, as you know. One, the Crusades, and again, there is a lot of misinformation, perhaps disinformation about the Crusades in the West these days. They were called, as you know, first of all, because the routes of the European pilgrims to the Holy Land were being obstructed by the Seljuk Turks, who had newly accepted Islam. Secondly, the Fatimi Caliph, who is widely known to have been mad, destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He also destroyed many Muslim monuments. I mean, that is why people think he was mad. But this, of course, raised all sorts of concerns in Europe and elsewhere about the sanctity of the holy places. No one, of course, justifies all that happened in the Crusades by any manner of means, and there was much brutality as well as chivalry on both sides, as you know. But there are two things to be said about the Crusades. One is that the Crusades were never directed only against Muslims. There was a crusade against the Albigensians, there was a crusade against the Jews, and of course there was the crusade against Constantinople itself. Arguably a crusade that weakened Constantinople to such an extent that eventually it fell in 1453. Secondly, according to Arab historians themselves, like Amin Mahlouf, the people who suffered most as a result of the Crusades were the Oriental Christians, because they were regarded as a fifth column by Islam and as heretics by the West. So they were caught in a pincer movement. The second great disturbance, of course, was the Mongol invasions. Now, I was very interested in what was said about the Eurasia idea. But the Central Asian peoples had been coming into the established Middle East for centuries. The Turks themselves are an example of that. But the Mongols, when they came, they devastated whichever city they conquered. In 1258, Baghdad fell. And the Persian poet Sadi, lamenting over the fall of Baghdad, says, Muhammad, if you are to come on Judgment Day, come now, because this is Judgment Day. The Mongols destroyed Baghdad. Some among the Mongols were Shia Muslims. Some among them were Nestorian Christians. So the Shia and the Nestorian Christian communities were treated more leniently, and the Sunnis very harshly. So nothing changes, you see. I mean, if you look at Baghdad today, these conflicts go back a long way indeed. The result of all of this, of course, was that Arab supremacy in the Islamic world came to a decisive end, and eventually was replaced, as you know, by a little-known Turkish tribe called the Osmanli, who established the great Ottoman Empire that lasted until modern times. And there is a great deal to say about the Ottomans, both positively and negatively. For instance, their practice of devshirme, which was the compulsory conscription of Christian children to be trained as higher civil servants in the Ottoman Empire, which went on in the Balkans for centuries and fueled a great deal of Christian resentment against Ottoman rule. However, the thing that I want to emphasize about the Ottomans is their refining of the idea of the dhimma. They used a pre-Islamic Persian idea which they called the millah or the millet to organize communities in their vast empire in such a way that these communities had high levels of autonomy, mainly under their religious leaders, though not exclusively. They had their own system of personal law, sometimes their own system of commercial law, certainly in family matters and religious matters. They had quite a high level of independence. Now, one of the reasons why the millet was defined so precisely by the Ottomans was to allow them to govern effectively without deploying huge armed forces, huge numbers of armed forces in their empire. But the byproduct of this has been a great sense of autonomy amongst ethnic and religious communities wherever the Ottomans have been. And this is why, whether it's the Balkans or modern Iraq, unitary solutions of governing these places are always problematic. And it seems that the future must lie in some kind of confederal arrangements. However, from the 19th century onwards, the Western powers began to put pressure on the Ottomans to do away with the millet system. And so the Caliph issued a succession of edicts in the 19th century, first modifying the millet system and then abolishing it altogether, though it took some time to implement these edicts for one reason or another. The problem is that the millets themselves did not want to do away with the millet system. They had got so used to this cozy relationship that they had, particularly their religious and political elites, that they did not want equality with Muslims as citizens. However, that equality willy-nilly did come about, and this is what gave birth to the various nationalisms that the Ottoman Empire produced. First in the Balkans and Greece, of course, and then in the Arab world. The Arab world, after centuries of being dormant, began to realize that it had a specific identity. And the point to make here is that it was the Christian communities of the Arab world that were foremost in the articulation of Arab nationalism, of what is known as the Nahda. So there's a galaxy of names, Constantine, Anton Farah, Constantine Jurek, Michel Aflaq, of course, the founder of the Ba'ath Party, Boutros Ghali, the ancestor of the present Boutros Ghali, and so forth. Arab nationalism, like the other nationalisms that were being produced, acknowledged the place of religion, but did not give it a primary place. So Arab identity had to do with language, culture, history, in which Islam obviously had a place, but not the primary place. This was at the same time, or just a little bit earlier, than the emergence of Turkish nationalism. And I think what we have to realize about the emergence of Turkish nationalism is that it was produced at a time when the Ottoman Empire was doing the Cheshire Cat Act. It was in the process of disappearing. It took a long time to disappear. The smile remained for a while, but then it went. And the Turks found themselves without an empire, rather like the British. So Turkey for the Turks is grounded in this idea. The Arabs have gone, the Balkans have gone, what about us? The same with Indian Muslim nationalism that produced Pakistan. Pakistan was not produced by theocrats. It was produced by Indian Muslim nationalists who wanted Muslim culture to have a place under the sun. It later became theocratic. That's a different story. And perhaps we should ask why it was that these nationalisms began to fade. Partly because of the experience of colonialism and neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism is very important. I mean, you cannot understand the history of revolutionary Iran without understanding what happened in 1953 when the moderately socialist government of Prime Minister Mossadegh was toppled with Western help. The same with Afghanistan and the Soviets there, Western help to the Mujahideen, what happened in the camps in northern Pakistan, directly or indirectly produced first the seeds of the Taliban, and the foreign fighters who came to help in the struggle were the seeds of bodies like Al-Qaeda, but not only them, of course. Arabic has a particularly fine word for a terrorist, but it is almost never used nowadays because the colloquial word for a terrorist now is Afghan, not meaning a person of Afghan origin, but somebody who has trained in Islamic extremism in Afghanistan or northern Pakistan. So the corruption of the ruling elites is another one that is often mentioned by Islamists. So when they're not blaming the West, they're blaming their own rulers. The emergence of a disenfranchised urban class of young men particularly, and of a rural disenfranchised class which feeds the madrasas on the Pakistan-Afghanistan borders. The failure of both the command economy model and of capitalism in its traditional form in the Islamic world. I wish I had time to go into that, but I don't. So there are all sorts of reasons why nationalisms were replaced in the end by Islamism of one kind or another. Now this brings us back to the issues that we have been facing, and I just want to rehearse them before I stop, Father Richard. The first is, what should be the relationship of religion to the state. And we are clear that it should not be theocracy. We are clear here, but there are many people out there who are not clear about this. We are clear that the role of religion to the state must be that of persuasion and not coercion, but there are many people out there who are not so clear. Pluralism is a word like multiculturalism that is bandied about. And I think the problem with many of these words lies in those last three letters, the ism word. Multiculturalism, pluralism. What we have to do is to cope with plural reality. That no one can deny. Martin Marty, the Roman Catholic theologian at Chicago, has distinguished between civic plurality and theological pluralism. But Christian theologians often confuse the two.